All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Jacobson. I'm president of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you at the USA Climate Action Pavilion, hosted by the Climate Registry. The Business Council for Sustainable Energy is a broad-based energy trade association. We are based in Washington, D.C., but we work all over the United States at the state, local, and federal level. And we have an interesting origin story. Our organization was founded by U.S. energy executives in the energy efficiency, natural gas, and renewable energy industries in 1992. And I bet some of you who are here in the audience or watching online may know how important that year is. That is the year of the Rio Earth Summit, which was the conference where the United Nations Framework on Climate Change was born. So the members of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy took that as their first action because they knew that U.S. industry was ready to deliver in terms of technology and wanted to share expertise and craft this really important regime that we are all working in right now, which has led to the Paris Agreement and the action agenda that is a huge part of COP30. We've got an excellent conversation today, especially for U.S. audiences, very much top of mind for everybody. How are we going to address the energy opportunities and challenges associated with this exponential load growth that we are anticipating in the United States? We've already seen a couple of years of the early stages of this load growth manifest itself from a number of different aspects. We've seen it from manufacturing, we've seen it from AI and data centers, and we've seen it by increased electricity use by businesses and households. So we've really flipped the page on what had been for 2 decades a story of decarbonization, affordable, reliable, clean energy, helping to reshape a marketplace where we were not expanding load. So now we still are working to provide that same affordable, reliable, clean energy to consumers around the country, but we're doing it at a time where we have very sharp demand. And in some cases, we're also experiencing increases in prices. So there's a lot to unpack in this conversation, but we have an excellent group with us to help us do that. So let me introduce our panelists, and then I will let them take a few moments to offer some opening comments. So directly to my right, we have Gabrielle Peterson, Global Director of Content and Communications for the International Copper Association. Next to her, we have Sophie Marimati, Vice President of Global Government Affairs and Public Policy with Aviva. And then to her right, we have James Glick, Executive Director for the Plant-Based Products Council. And to his right, we have Sandy Grace, Vice President for U.S. Policy and Regulatory Strategy at National Grid. They all come to these questions from different vantage points. They come with technology solutions, they come with ideas to overcome challenges and barriers, and what I especially like about it too is they come from different aspects of the energy marketplace. So I'm really looking forward to hear their comments. But before we hop into some of the discussion questions, Gabrielle, we'll go down the line. Everyone just please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience here and your orientation to this question. How are we going to meet our ambitions on decarbonization and sustainability, but still meet demand and keep it affordable and reliable?
Hi everyone, I'm Gabrielle Peterson at the International Copper Association. I'm our Global Director of Communications. So at ICA we represent about half of the world's copper production up to the cathode. And what that means is we promote, we protect, and we defend copper. So we promote copper as the material of choice and the metal of possibility, and our members as responsible producers. We protect copper markets through science-based advocacy, and we defend copper demand in 6 key applications across 7 key geographies, which represent about 70% of global copper demand. So why are we here today? Well, copper is since we're in the US Pavilion, I'll say conductor in chief It is the best non-precious conductor of heat and electricity, so it is used extensively as the material of choice for anything to do with energy efficiency, anything with electricity, and of course the clean energy transition and electrification. Clean energy technologies can use up to 12 times more copper per kilowatt hour generated, so it is very essential to this transition, and you cannot have the clean energy transition or the digital transition without it.
Does this work? Okay. Hi everyone, Sophie Miramadi from Aviva. Aviva is a software company. We produce software for the industrial world. Thinking specifically about this question, in the US, about 90% of the large power utilities are our customers. We also work with the independent system operators. And then many of the largest industrial power consumers are also our customers across water, wastewater, manufacturing, mining, shipping, and of course, data centers. So what I'm hoping to bring to the conversation today is thoughts on how we can use digitization and data-driven approaches to improve the efficiency of power generation and transmission, some examples of what we're doing there, and also how we can use some of those same approaches to reduce industrial power demand and improve the efficacy of industrial ecosystems and value chains as a whole through better data sharing along those systems. So look forward to the conversation this morning.
Morning. James Glick with the Plant-Based Products Council. And the Plant-Based Products Council is a group of folks throughout the value chain, so everything from growers of feedstock, think of farmers, think of folks on the aggregating grain merchandising side of things, manufacturers, large and small, everyone from large plastics and chemical companies to folks that are still working in a laboratory and looking to scale up their production. And then those who have products that interact with consumers. Think about your packages, think about kind of the clamshell that you might have food in, think about kind of the shampoo you use today. So a whole range of folks across the across the value chain. Our members work with a range of feedstocks on the plant-based side, everything from corn and soy in North America. Here in Brazil, sugar is oftentimes a feedstock of choice, but we have folks working with everything from ag waste, think about kind of potato skins being turned into plastic for mulch on a specialty crop operation, so a whole range of feedstocks. From the conversation today, kind of where does our role fit here, right? Maybe a little bit of an odd duck in this lineup, but I think as we think about the sectors that our members are operating in, the materials, packaging, and chemical side, those are all really hard to abate sectors on the emissions front. As we look at the energy side of things, these are energy intensive sectors, and so we see real opportunity for efficiency and circularity with our members.
Hi everyone, I'm Sandy Grace. Thank you very much, Lisa and the BCSE, for inviting us to participate in this conversation. I'm here on behalf of National Grid. So we are an electric and gas delivery company in the United States. We are in Massachusetts and New York State. In the UK, we provide electricity and transmission services electricity via transmission and distribution throughout the UK and Wales, Great Britain and Wales. And the reason that I think, that I'm really excited to participate in this conversation is twofold. The one thing about us in the United States and the UK is we are the utility that provides electricity and natural gas to our customers, and so in terms of thinking about using innovation to deliver those energy sources in a reliable and affordable way, we are all the time thinking about where can we be most effective in deploying innovative solutions. And the other aspect from which I wanted to speak today is that we also have a venture capital arm called National Grid Partners, in which we are investing in startup companies that are adjacent to the utility sector, which I'll talk more about today, that can help expand grid capacity and the to be much more efficient in terms of utilizing our existing resources.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really exciting pairing, right? Because, you have the opportunity to take advantage and help grow a solution set for the work you're trying to do. I want to come back and talk about that. So, there's a lot of conversation about AI, AI in terms of the energy it uses, AI in terms of, well, maybe that's changing, it's becoming more efficient. And then AI as an optimizer, where do each one of you come to that conversation? What's your reaction when someone mentions AI and you think about it from your lens? Let's go to Gabrielle.
For me, it's about making it more sustainable and energy efficient, but it's also about the supply chains that come into producing this and making it possible, and the demand that comes from that. So for us, AI is the technology of the future. We all know that, but I think so many people reduce it to knowledge management, and it's so much more. So we need to think about its full impacts on energy in terms of generating its utility and also the impacts that it then can make on the supply chain itself and in manufacturing and production. So just to give you some clarity on where copper comes into this story, data center demand that drives copper is 0.9 million tons a year. We expect that to increase to 1.4 million tons by 2030 with a compound annual growth rate of 8% during that time. So it is significant. We also know that copper is used in data centers and things like the power generation, about 75%, cooling systems, about 7%, and then IT and other applications, about 18%. So that's where it's used in the data centers that help generate the AI. Data centers already, as of 2024, account for 3% of global copper demand. So that is significant. And the US accounts for 40% of that demand. So the US is specifically a huge driver of data center production and copper demand. So why copper is used in these things? Well, it helps makes it more energy efficient. It helps to reduce the power usage effectiveness, which helps reduce the overall electricity consumed. And it also is circular, so it helps increase the general sustainability of the embodied carbon and the carbon emissions. So critical minerals like copper are really essential to these technologies, and I think it's important because it is the linchpin, it is the connecting factor and link between both the clean energy transition and what we can do to reduce emissions and this digital transition and making it possible and driving innovation in the market. But for that, we need clean supply. So I will say, an old famous phrase, if it's not grown, it's mined. So we need to ensure, and we need to start talking to the supply chains and include industry in this discussion to ensure that we have responsible modern production happening in terms of the supply of these materials that are going into these structures. And that's where ICA has done a lot. We work with world leaders in responsible production practices. We've also helped create responsible production assurance frameworks, site-specific ones like the Copper Mark, to ensure environmental and worker safety and sustainability, and that we're lowering those impacts globally. So those are the kind of initiatives that I would love to see more of, and why I think this conversation really needs to broaden a little bit and start to encompass the materials that actually make AI possible.
Yeah, I would just say, as we talked about, there was a ministerial roundtable yesterday, one of a number of conversations where they're focused very much in this setting on critical minerals, a lot of the issues you discussed, the value chain, what the partnership opportunities between industry and countries are. That is not generally what you would expect to get that ministerial level of attention, but I think that's what's really exciting about this particular COP, is that the action agenda and the leadership of Brazil, which cares very much, they see themselves as resource rich and an opportunity to expand and serve some of these markets, but they need that collaboration within their region, but also to learn and foster these markets globally. So I was really pleased to see that. I want to mix it up a little bit. James, why don't we go to you next, please? No,
I love that, Lisa, because the comment Gabrielle made about if it's not grown, it's mined, made me think, well, there's a lot of things that are grown that AI can be part of the solution for as well, and that's exactly what our businesses are. You thinking about that farmer side where the growing really happens. AI can speed development of new products, seed technologies and fertilizers. There's precision technology that can be accelerated through the use of AI. So think about where water is used and where fertilizer is applied in a very thoughtful and precise manner. And overall, that reduces the emissions on the ag production side, which is a big part of the value chain that our members are thinking about. But also as we move down that value chain to the manufacturing side, accelerating the research and development. There's a lot of innovation happening in this field. And that process can take time. That process also can be energy and sort of material intensive as you're developing what works, what doesn't work to meet consumer demand. And so being able to speed that up through modeling, through kind of AI technology is a big part of that efficiency that can be realized on the manufacturing side. You know, at the end of the day, it's all about kind of increasing the use of those sustainable kind of resources and doing it in a way that doesn't just limit it to one stage of that value chain, but really looks at it from our perspective across the value chain. You know, thinking about, you know, examples of where does this happen within our space. You know, thinking about a North American company, Earthos, who you know, started as a bioplastics developer, you know, really focused on components that can make, you know, PLA, which is a bioplastic, you know, more applicable in certain uses. They've developed an AI platform that really speeds the work that they do, but also the work that they can do with others. Some of the data that they've seen because of that is they can bring a product to market 5 times faster. They can bring a product to market that saves about 90% of the cost. And so when you look at those level of efficiencies, and that just one example, you see really how AI is having a real impact in our sector.
Yeah, fascinating. I'd love to come back to you and talk more about other examples too, but great. All right, Sandy, I'm looking at you. Let's go next.
Yeah, I think about AI as an input to energy demand, as you mentioned earlier. And so when we're planning our system, we have to think long-term about what that demand looks like. It takes, our infrastructure assets last for 40, 50 years, and so it's a long-term horizon from an investment standpoint, and infrastructure takes a long time to build. And so when we're thinking about AI, like how much of that AI is going to drive energy demand in our states? The other lens from which I think about AI is the relationship to affordability concerns in the U.S. overall with energy costs, but most acutely in the Northeast. And so when I think about like how do we smartly deploy AI like as a solution on the back end to help us like do our work more efficiently, that's going to be key. More like to think about like how you manage that demand over time in terms of flexibility. So we're building out the system smarter and in a way that, you know, is sustainably achievable from like a cost perspective for our customers. So AI as an input to energy demand, and then AI as a potential solution set to, you know, running the operations efficiently and predicting, you know, how much we're going to build and how much of the flexibility we can harness from the load that's coming into the system.
So that's a good opportunity for you to hop in, Sophie, because you both like serve, your customers are data centers, but you also work with customers outside the data center space, and you're helping them use AI and optimize. But what are some examples, or are there other aspects of it that you would want to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, Sandy said it. There's a huge amount of energy infrastructure implications here. You know, I think I'm looking here at data. U.S. power consumption in data centers is due to multiply by 4 by 2030. That's huge. And so we are, as a software company, we're involved in helping our utility companies, customers to think about how they plan and manage that grid capacity. Also looking at integration of, you know, storage capacity into the grid, how they understand, as Sandy said, the demand and the detail around that demand and how they flex that system in order to make existing infrastructure as efficient as possible. And to plan that CapEx build out as efficiently as possible. We also think about the water infrastructure, so we have a lot of customers on the water wastewater side. You know, we all are very focused, and rightly so, on the energy impact. AI also has a major water impact, and I think it's a stat I used yesterday. I love it. We know that it's not just about the data center water consumption. Actually, 70% of AI's water consumption is upstream in the power generation, and that's why it's increasingly important to look at renewable power generation, because that's so much more water efficient as well as energy efficient. And as a business, we also look at developing the AI infrastructure. That's everything from working with chip manufacturers to data center providers, and the broader life cycle energy use of that data center. And so we think about the impact of those AI applications, so how you can design out that infrastructure as efficiently as possible, how you can integrate innovation. And then we, as I mentioned earlier, we work on the demand side. So how can you reduce the industrial energy demand as effectively as possible? And talking specifically about data center energy demand, I mean, some examples you asked for, I mean, we find that when you use a really sophisticated data-driven approach to understand how your data center is using power, you are typically able to reduce that demand by up to around 20%. So that's really material. And we need to make sure that we are applying those approaches much more systematically across data center build out now. So it's not just about better chips, that's really important, but it's also about how you run your data center. Oh, and finally, I'm going to come on to this. We need to be able to get to a place where we can measure the net environmental impact, you know, energy in versus energy saved and avoided by using the AI application. And I'll come on to talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, I wanted to hear a little bit more from you, Gabrielle, about, you know, the efficiency of copper, because, you know, I think that is very connected to what Sophie was just discussing.
Yes, so as said, copper is the best non-precious conductor of heat and electricity. You really can't beat it. And, you know, I think you can look and say that the world is moving from a fossil fuel intensive world to a material intensive world. And as we see this shift happening, manufacturers are making decisions differently. It's not just about price anymore. They're looking at carbon footprint. They're looking at responsible production. They're looking at circularity. And this is another thing, you know, copper's 100% recyclable. So, you know, 2/3 of copper ever produced is still in productive use. So it's not, you know, crazy to think that the copper in this microphone or my iPad here could have been mined, you know, 100 years ago. So once it's out of the ground, we can use it over and over again. And so when we think about choosing the best materials that can actually, you know, reduce energy consumption, that can reduce GHG emissions, and can then be recycled at end of life, the responsible stewardship of that in these technologies is critical. So, you know, we need to work with governments, we work with partners, work with the private sector to increase collection at end of life. And again, I say we continue to need this all of the above approach, right, to meet this kind of demand that's coming from these data centers or other technologies, or clean energy transition, the digital and twin transitions. And we need, you know, increased mining, because you need both mining and recycling to meet demand. But we also need to increase collection at end of life, design for sustainability, design for circularity, right? And we need all of these sorts of processes together. We need streamlined permitting, you know, increased smelting and refining capacities, especially in the US, right? So these are things that in order to maintain that secure supply chain that you're going to need to see more and more of. So I hope that, you know, we can work together, and that's why, you know, I believe, again, industry, manufacturing needs to be part of these conversations. They need to be part of the supply chain with the end users. And together, I think we can come up with some more creative solutions for how to make this more energy efficient.
So there was a lot in there that you discussed. I just want to pull out one, which is recycling. And when you're thinking about the United States, who is responsible for recycling? How does that actually work? You know, just give us a little bit more detail there.
Yeah, so I mean, there's always an issue with scrap and importing and exporting scrap. So that's something where the U.S., in terms of smelting and refining and recycling, like lacks the facilities that we have elsewhere in the globe. So that's something where I think, in terms of infrastructure, that, you know, both we need incentive from government and policymakers, but we also need private sector to continue to drive this. But it's something where, if we hope to see more innovation, especially in the midstream and downstream, that we need to like work together again to create more incentive to increase domestic recycling.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Sandy, let's go back to something you said at the beginning about National Grid's, you know, venture arm, you know, your technology innovation arm. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what are the kinds of technologies that that National Grid Ventures is looking at, and like, does that help you from the utility side, and if so, how?
Yeah, happy to talk about those. So our venture capital arm is invested in the U.S. already. more than $520 million in portfolio companies. I'll just give you an example of some of the companies that we've already invested in. So there's a company called AI Dash, and what they do is use AI and satellite imagery to help us with our vegetation management practices. So when I talked earlier about like how to operate efficiently, reduce costs, and then to also increase and enhance reliability, AI Dash is an example of a system like that we're deploying, and it reduces like wildfire risk and storm related risks. And I was looking at my notes earlier, and I was thinking, so in Massachusetts, since we've adopted the use of this technology, storm related outages are down by 30%. So that is really pretty impactful to our customers and to, to Massachusetts overall. We also have invested in a company called Line Vision. So basically, Line Vision uses sensors that are clamped onto transmission towers. And what those sensors are, they give us data on with respect to the ratings on the transmission assets, and it allows us to like be smarter about utilization of the capacity of that transmission asset. And then another one, which is TS Conductor, which I know you guys may have heard about, but they're superconductors that we've invested in as well. So I think there's like tremendous opportunity to utilize technologies in order to increase the existing efficiency of our systems to date. And in addition to the investments that I've mentioned that we've already made in these companies, we've made a commitment to invest in $100 million in AI, other AI-related startups as well. And there's one in particular that I've gotten to know more recently, and it's called Emerald AI. And one of the things that Emerald AI does is a software tool that like allows for data centers to manage workflow. And if you're thinking about like flexibility of demand and managing demand over the system, that could be a very, very important tool to thinking about utilization of our existing assets.
So, so far the conversation has been, fairly optimistic and quite positive. We've identified things that didn't really exist 5 to 7 years ago in many cases for the sectors that we work in. But, here we are both to a U.S. and global audience. I guess what are the challenges or the concerns that you have to expand upon these opportunities in the next 5-10 years? I mean, what's top of mind for you as you think about those? James, let's go to you first.
You bet. And for us, it's as an industry that is very much on the cusp of innovation and growing, it's really about innovation infrastructure, and so the need to build capacity. That's technical capacity, kind of the information that is shared, but also it's truly just the kind of manufacturing capacity, particularly thinking about a North America, U.S. perspective. The pilot and demonstration scale facilities are lacking. When we think about competitors around the globe, the U.S. has about, I think it's less than 30 facilities that are in that early demonstration scale. You look at Europe, the EU has about 480 of those size facilities. And so as you're looking at bringing a new idea to market, something that will be more energy efficient, your ability to do that in the U.S., close to home, close to the feedstocks you've been working in the lab on, is pretty limited. And so thinking about, sometimes companies have to look abroad, places like Asia for that scale up. And so I think for us, a big challenge here in growing quickly is really just that innovation infrastructure and the need to share information. There's a lot of opportunity on the technology side, on the AI side for information sharing with the research that's being done, but encouraging folks, there are folks on the panel talking about ways to make shifts in how the industry works. We're in many cases very early in that stage, and so making sure that that folks kind of invest and share information from the get-go is really key, I think, to the challenges we see.
Thanks, James. So let's finish this a little bit, and then we'll welcome Julia. But I want to, maybe go to Sophie, you next. I mean, how do you see this landscape? Like, what's keeping us from doing more of this, or what are the conversations you're having with your customers to kind of break through?
Well, James, you've covered, and Sandy have covered the sort of challenges around infrastructure build out. Perhaps I'll talk a little bit around the challenges around AI adoption. I think a lot of this comes down to digital maturity, right? So if you think about the consumer world, we have very widespread, very impactful adoption and impact from consumer AI applications, whether that's in the retail finance world or e-commerce. But in the industrial world, we tend to have walled gardens of data. Our data sets tend to be much, much more siloed. And until we can organize our data, we're not going to drive the value from AI. It's a really simple point to make, but that's particularly true of SMEs. But it also rings true to the larger organizations as well, and we see this time and time again. So I would say digital maturity across the industrial sector is a really core prerequisite to driving value from AI and all of the efficiency and managing complexity that we're going to need to do as we move towards our net zero future.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
I'm going to borrow this. I wanted to add one point to what Sophie made, which is really critical around data. So one of the things that is emerging is regulation and policy around use of AI. I think that's still very nascent, but concerns around customer privacy and use of data. I think we have to see how that continues to evolve, but it will provide, to the extent there are regulations and policies, they'll provide frameworks and opportunities, I think, for shaping how that AI is hopefully most efficiently utilized.
So, Gabrielle, why don't we hear from you, and then, Julia, we're going to welcome you.
Sure. Well, going to AI usage, maybe it's interesting to think about this in reverse. I've talked a lot about what goes into producing AI, but maybe it's interesting to think about how AI then, in turn, affects industry and production. So mining has changed. It's not your grandfather's mine anymore. So AI is very often used in production practices. We have very innovative technologies. There's automated trucks. There's digital twinning going on. We have trucks where if you scoop out the rock, it can tell you the ore grade of how much copper is in the rock with each scoop, and it can make mining safer and more efficient. And there was a case not even too long ago, it was a big story, where AI is used with satellite imagery, and it can help discover new deposits of metals like copper. And there was such a case in Zambia, and it was one of the largest copper deposits ever discovered there. And that was through AI. So I don't know, maybe the robots have entered their hunter-gatherer era, and they're discovering the metals that help power them. But I think it's a really interesting time, and I think we need to also think about the case studies that, the opportunities that come from that. It's limitless. So not only can we use AI and we can help support its creation and distribution and energy efficiency, but also AI can help make production more responsible. It can help make it more technologically advanced. It can help make it safer. So I think we need to be really smart about how we leverage these technologies in the production process as well.
Thank you. Well, there are two people that joined us. One right here. Julia, do we have a name for our new friend?
That is a, I'm sorry I'm late gift from the IFC panelists.
Okay. Really happy to introduce Julia Sauter, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the Long Duration Energy Storage Council. So, Julia, we've been talking, as you know, about the opportunity in the energy sector and our economy overall for AI. Coming from the long duration energy storage perspective, how are you looking at AI, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities you see for your sector?
No, thank you, and it's great to be here, and it's lovely to see you all. It's actually, the panel I was just on was an announcement of the UNFCCC's capacity pledge and hub, and so amazing that this ties right into our conversation, because it's about capacity of people, but how do you bridge around the world getting the equal transparency and access on all different types of industry data, and looking at AI as part of a tool to use this, and having the right platforms, because there's going to be some security aspects of how to work through it. So I love the synergies of the integration of implementation COP coming forward. On the focus of long duration storage in particular, I think it's twofold and three-phase. So on one of the faces, it's that the world needs data center capacity, and whether it's a hyperscaler or different types, that also means a lot of energy. And as we're all hearing around the world, there is a limitation of how much energy we can get. So that justifies and exacerbates the need for storage. And so with storage, we want to make sure that we can give that reliable, round-the-clock, 24/7 power, heat, or cooling to data centers. So the need piece is there. And the second part is on the face is that, well, now we have the technologies to provide that. To provide the congestion relief, but we also have it to replace backup diesel generators. And this is happening actually in island nations today, and that transfer of knowledge is also being incorporated into real-world case studies on an island in Cyprus, for example, the most recent example. And on the third side, then the policy piece. In the AI conversations, we have Google, AWS, and Microsoft, they're all members because they want to own, operate, and deploy long-duration energy storage. So they're in the conversations about what technologies, where they are in the commercial readiness level, but they're also in the conversations about the policies that have to create open market access. So it's all these different perspectives that are coming together, demonstrating the need for storage, and particularly long duration, because data centers are asking for the 20-hour or even 100-hour for the reliability aspect. So it's in the mining piece that mining, the minerals is also part of long-duration energy storage. Having the factories, the different mining companies use long-duration storage on site in a more effective way to decrease emissions.
Right. So, for some in our audience, you kind of got at it towards the end, but from your perspective, how is long-duration energy storage different than traditional, battery storage?
Right. Great question. And there are 4 families of long-duration storage, and the electrochemical is the periodic table, so that's where lithium-ion falls in. And lithium-ion could do 2, 4 hours, 6 hours. It gets more expensive when you get to the 16, 24 hours. I mean, it just triples in price, or sometimes even quadruples in price. It gets really expensive. So there's other technologies. So the other elements are zinc, iron, vanadium, carbon, calcium, magnesium, and you go through the air batteries, the flow batteries, and metal batteries. And for example, one of our companies takes a vanadium mine here in Brazil and then uses it in a fuel cell, and the plastics around it might deteriorate, but the vanadium is 100% informed that you can just recycle the whole thing over again. And you can't always do that with all parts of the lithium-ion cell, and so that's another aspect. There's the thermal energy storage, which can hold power, heat, or cooling for days, weeks, months, and even years, and doesn't lose any efficiency. It might be like 0.5%. So the fact that you can store this when you might have a storm coming that's coming in 3 days, and you can capture all the solar and wind and hold it. So during those 3 days, all of a sudden you have all that backup power coming online. And hydrogen is chemical, and so we also look at what fuel source, but also storage source, and that was also hundreds of hours. And then you have the mechanical, the pumped hydro. You have the mechanical, the liquid compressed air, or the carbon air, and even hydrogen can be compressed air. So this also provides anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. And again, you have that durability aspect. So there's no one size fits all. The benefit is that the diversity of technologies, and these also don't catch on fire. And they're all very environmentally safe and environmentally profound, because you can find them in many countries all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, you also just mentioned this initiative. I had mentioned a ministerial initiative yesterday on grids to mines. This COP really is focused on not aspirational, but action. I mean, so many times we are in technology conversations where we're talking of the art of the possible, but the art of the possible is, not commercially available. A lot of what we have are the pieces that we can use to optimize the energy system. And I just, for audiences in the United States or audiences here, what would you tell them are the top things that they should be thinking about by getting this more widespread, either in the U.S. economy or globally? I'm going to start with Sandy.
I think one of the biggest challenges is scaling, because scaling new technologies helps lower the prices of them. And so I think one of the key aspects that we've been working on at National Grid is what are the regulatory frameworks that would enable utilities to really step into the shoes of scaling the technologies, deploying them at scale, and helping to make the existing infrastructure more efficient, and to think about like planning the system of the future more efficiently and cost effectively and quickly as well, because that's the other dynamic. We've talked about scale, but there's a pace element too, because this demand is coming very, very quickly, and it's coming into the grid at different spots. So you're starting to see large loads like evolve over the system, which isn't traditionally the way load has grown on an electricity system.
Not to go too much into technical aspects of policy, but give us one example or two of like what would enable that for a utility. Like, what are utilities looking for?
Yeah. Okay. So typically, what happens is when a utility is trying out a new technology, they pilot it. And so sometimes what you need to, well, a lot of times what you need to do is you need to make a filing with your regulator to get the permission to do the pilot. And then you go through the pilot process, which is approval of that pilot before you can deploy the pilot. And then once you deploy the pilot, then you submit the lessons learned, you evaluate the cost benefits, and the cost benefits oftentimes don't include the benefits that you derive from like the pilot not working, like in the sense of like, you know, learning from like what didn't work. And so like that can be that sort of evaluation time period in terms of like piloting new technology is something we've got to better streamline as an industry. And I think there are some jurisdictions that have deployed things called regulatory sandboxes, which allow utilities to deploy very, very quickly new technologies, try them out, and you know, it's learning fast through failing fast sometimes. And so I think that's just one of the many ways that the construct needs to evolve. And we do have a panel on Monday that I'm going to give a quick plug for that is going to really focus on the policy and regulatory enablers to encourage innovation. But the concept of a regulatory sandbox is one such example.
Yeah, that's a very good visual. Yeah, so Julia, you were nodding your head, so it doesn't have to only be with utilities, right? But like what does it take to get this long duration energy storage in the marketplace and helping communities and businesses?
I'll give 3 examples. One is in Spain, where we brought together a roundtable 2 years ago with industry, government officials, regulators, and policymakers with technology developers to sit down and say, what are the barriers? And what came out of this, a couple roundtables were the government then, because the government was working with the utilities and developers, announced a 2-part plan. So one part was R&D on some new innovations to help expedite and move faster, and the other was already market signals to start opening up the market. A year later, they were starting to fund in public-private partnership actual projects and help them both behind the meter and in front of the meter. They were able to jump a queue because of hybridization. And then because of the recent blackout in the Iberian Peninsula, this also just expedited another policy and planning where now there are 7 different thermal energy storage projects in deployment, and 2 will be finished by the end of the year. I mean, that is fast deployment. So that's one example of amazing partnership. Another is in Australia, similar mechanism of bringing groups together and create the capacity investment scheme. There's also continuity, even with the government change, that policy stayed in place. That was huge because we needed that to continue to support LDES deployment. There's now been the first phase of the market. It was kind of a mix between a lot of lithium ion and then 2 projects in long duration storage. They realized they had to set up 2 different tracks because we all need short duration and we wanted to keep that, but they also set up a separate track for long duration storage with pilots. And 2 of our project members got funding from ARENA, which is a research development group, to jumpstart pilots to help the utilities get comfortable. And those have been running for up over a year and a half and one over 2 years. That data now is being shared with everybody because they realize even though there might have been some mistakes, everyone can learn. And this is now added to the criteria and the RFP proposals for the utilities. And now there's this comfort and trust that has been built up. There are many more, but those are just some quick ones I could think of.
Yeah, amazing. And again, it makes you wonder and take a lot of gratitude for the forums that we have here at COP30, because that's a big part of what I've been doing, has been in smaller group settings where we're bringing together governments, we're bringing together industry and other stakeholders, and we're saying, okay, well, what are the critical challenges we have at this point in the energy transition? So, Sophie, let's hear from you a little bit on that.
So I am going to talk here a little bit about data sharing, because I think as we try and integrate new technologies, whether that's storage technologies or solutions onto the grid, or whether that is renewable power, we need to rethink how the systems work within our economy, and think about how we can get better at exchanging data particularly between energy users and suppliers, but it's also around materials use as well. And this can be uncomfortable. This can be uncomfortable because we are used to being quite protective, particularly in the industrial world, of our data, and often the data sharing frameworks and norms don't apply. So we have been looking at how we can prove out some of the value of increased data sharing, particularly looking at industrial clusters within ports, so very, very highly emissive, energy-intensive businesses, and look at how you can trial better data sharing to then come up with solutions that provide better energy forecasting and energy sharing and energy trading for that ecosystem as a whole, and make it much more efficient. And we know that this is not going to be easy. We know this is going to flush out loads of problems around governance of that data. So we're working with research partners to look at how we can develop new governance, but also commercial models. So, if I share my data with you, Sandy, and around my energy use, and that enables you to provide me energy more cost effectively, you're saving money. Am I saving as much money? Is that fair? We need to come up with frameworks to enable people to kind of go confidently into this scenario, and to be able to model and predict the value of data sharing. So I think this is one of the problems that we need to really dive into. There will be regulatory barriers, but there will also be perceived regulatory barriers that actually don't exist. And actually this scenario that we're looking at does incorporate a integration of a novel storage solution as well within the port. So I'm hoping that it's going to produce lots of really interesting lessons, and we'll talk about it later.
Sure. For me, the key solution, and I'll keep saying this, is to make sure that we have a reliable supply of these critical minerals that make this all possible at the end of the day. We were very excited to be added to the USGS critical minerals list, and that was a big step in the right direction here in the US. But I will say, at the end of the day, a mine globally on average takes 16 years to open, and in the US, 29 years. So if we want to ensure that we have access, nature has given us these incredible resources, copper being one of them. And I think when we bring nature and the human element and the artificial to the table, I think all together that we can leverage that power, that triangle, to create something really interesting to advance sustainable human development. And that's really what we're about, and ICA has been singing this story for a while, that this is the silent partner of millennia, right? These are the tools that we have used to take human ingenuity and these materials, and that has enabled progress. So for me, let's make sure that not only on the mining side, but also on the recycling side, 40% of global copper demand is already met with recycled material. Let's increase those domestic capabilities here in the US. Let's make sure we have the capacity to process those scrap streams, and also make sure that we have the raw material coming in. And if we can ensure access to these materials sustainably, responsibly, in a well-traced way, we can make a real difference, and we can make energy efficient AI generation. And I think that's going to be key to anything, between the renewable and the energy efficient, prongs there. If we can do that, we can really scale, I think, fast.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning, kind of efficiency, renewables. We have storage here. We have important opportunities for bio-based products. I mean, all of that has to come together, and it is reflected in what the COP is considering through a lot of the pathways and energy conversations in these halls. A lot of it spurring from the outcomes of Dubai, where they highlighted particular energy pathways, and then last year's COP, made advancements as it relates to grid. I wanted to it made me think that we hadn't talked about it yet. Business Council for Sustainable Energy, in partnership with global energy efficiency industries and partners, has been working on an opportunity to elevate the energy efficiency goal in particular, which is to double the rate of energy efficiency improvements in the short term. This is a really exciting prospect and really exciting for U.S. industry, because we were able to bring together over 180 U.S. companies to echo that call to action, showing the U.S. industry cares as well about all the energy pathways, but in particular about energy efficiency as part of that mix. You also, I can't believe we got through almost 3/4 of this panel without talking about federal permitting and siting reforms, because in addition to the conversation on AI, load growth, and energy affordability in the United States right now, we are having a conversation about how do we modernize our economy, and how do we build infrastructure, and how do we advance energy systems in a time frame that meets the moment. And we're not doing that currently, but that's a big topic with Congress and the Trump administration. It is a conversation that's happening with local governments. I was at the Local Leaders Summit just a week and a half ago in Rio de Janeiro, and we had excellent participation by U.S. governors as well as many mayors and city leaders. That's what they were talking about. They're like, we identify problems, but we are really struggling with the frameworks and the policies that enable us to move quickly to address these challenges. So a lot of really interesting work being done in the United States right now that's very applicable to the global stage. James, we didn't come back to you necessarily on this line of discussion, but open it back up to you to just remind folks a little bit more about how you're seeing your sector fit into this conversation that we've been having so far on the power sector.
Yeah, I mean, from a user perspective, companies and innovators that are really mindful of their environmental impact, their climate impact, are very, very mindful of their kind of energy use as well. And so I think, from that user perspective, it is core to where folks are siting facilities or where they're looking to locate, but also folks are really mindful that as they innovate new products, right? Whether it's on the chemistry side or on the packaging side, their longevity is key. It's key to the businesses here. You talk about the time frames it takes to, whether it's from the mining perspective or from a storage perspective, these companies want to be a business for a long period of time. And so thinking about policies that ensure that there's clear transparency throughout the value chain they operate in, making sure folks understand what bio-based means, making sure that folks understand what plant-based or kind of what the kind of value proposition is, and not just in one business transaction, but making sure that's consistent for years to come, from business to business, and most importantly to the consumer. We do quite a bit of consumer research and data around what consumers are demanding, because we see a lot of market opportunity in the U.S. and incredibly more so around the globe. But in the U.S. at least, we've seen over the last 3 years, well over 70%, 75% of consumers repeatedly say that they're familiar with these products and that they see them favorably. And so I think when you think about that demand is there, making sure that demand is maintained and isn't sacrificed, particularly among manufacturers that are really mindful of their energy footprint.
Yeah, I mean, you raised an important point that we also came up a little bit, but it's just, these are long-term investments. And we need that policy certainty. We need that permitting certainty if we're going to go down the road of developing certain projects and investments, that we are going to be able to move forward quickly. So I really appreciate what everybody has shared so far. We're gonna wrap it up here. I want to give everybody a last opportunity to share. Is there something that we have not covered that you would like to hear? Have an opportunity to highlight before we close. And yeah, Julie, I'll go to you first. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
No, it's about partnership, right? No, thank you again, and I'm sorry I'm so late. It was just so great to jump in, and I appreciate all the just the expertise on the panel and the work you're doing. And I love the synergies, Lisa, you put together with Copper, with Arriva, and your work they're doing to customers and plant-based. I mean, the different perspectives and a utility, and a global trade association. Like, this is lovely to, for a COP, but also just to show that we need integrated systems, and we need people with the technical capacity to bring this together. But we can't do that with the policy signals that aren't that long-term visionary aspect. And I think so for some of us that sometimes take pieces together, like policy sometimes, it might be too quick. But the work being done at COP is so impressive because it does start, I think now it's starting to integrate all these moving pieces and all these elements to say, you know, yesterday was both the mining conversation and ministerial, but it was also the grid and storage ministerial. And so the fact that those go hand in hand was acknowledged in both rooms. And I think that is so important. That wasn't happening a few years ago. So, and coming from, people, technical capacity building and capability to bringing that here, I think it's so powerful. So just want to leave on a note saying how impressive it is to see people really trying to transform policy into action and now work on implementation stages with all these factors of financing and mining and customers and industries and utilities and all working together. Because, for example, long duration storage is bankable. It's the solution today, and now we need the policies and integrated systems so we can provide the benefits to the customers around the world in every community. So thank you for this opportunity and look forward to working with all of you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be really quick. I mean, because I do think it's super critical to have the right policy signals and the right regulations to incentivize technology and innovation overall. From the regulatory framework discussion that we started today and then we'll continue on Monday, I think that is like a single biggest opportunity there is in the utility sector to get that energy demand addressed very quickly and very efficiently and very cost effectively.
Thanks. I think something I think about, we talked about the implementation COP, but it's also bioeconomy is a big conversation here being in Brazil and in the Amazon. And so I think that's something from where our members sit, very much excited about that theme continuing to grow with each year successively, but also what that means to local economies. As we think about where kind of some of the data centers are being located, it's also where our manufacturers are being located. It's an industry that's $489 billion a year, 4 million jobs, and those are jobs in rural economies in the U.S. And so that's something I think that needs to be, kind of folks need to think about as it's integrated conversation. It's having real impacts in communities that might not always be at the forefront of everyone's mind.
I'll make a really specific point. I agreed with what everyone else has said on the panel, including that it's been a really, really interesting and rich conversation, and I have learned a lot, especially about copper, so thank you. A really specific point around the fact that we really need to have an agreed and adopted methodology around how you measure and manage the net environmental impact of AI. We've got to get that.
I will say, remember your supply chains. They are they are there to help solve problems. Again, like this, we provide solutions to both clean energy and digital transitions. Like copper is foundational to both. So we have a lot of technical expertise. We have a lot of perspective that maybe isn't discussed widely at the end use level. So make sure that industry is included as your partners in those conversations, because there's a real appetite to make sure that it is done the right way, a responsibly modern way. And let's encourage that, and let's encourage access to these materials, and let's encourage responsible stewardship of those materials at their end of life with better recycling and use.
Great way to wrap it up, everybody. Thank you so much. I want to, let's give a big round of applause to our panelists. And again, I want to thank, on behalf of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, the opportunity to be here at the U.S. Climate Action Office. And thanks to the Climate Registry for hosting us. Thank you.
Thank you.